Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Don't Tell Me to Relax. So, I am here. I'm getting excited because I'm across looking at one of my favorite human beings, which I've said before, who is Kirsty Harrison. And when she's around, I start showing off. So, that's what I'm doing right now. So, Kirsty, in case anybody out there doesn't know who you are and what you do, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Hello, I'm Kirsty Harrison. I'm a nutritional therapist and I specialise in fertility and I work alongside the team at Hannafern Acupuncture and I also work alongside the team at the Fertility Nutrition Centre.
And we are going to do an episode all about gut health and how it interacts with fertility because it's interesting that lots and lots of people who have fertility or hormonal imbalance often have poor digestion or problems with their digestion. And I thought that it was a really good topic to discuss in a bit more detail. And also, we've done a lot about the vaginal microbiome, and there is now a lot of stuff out there that I think is kind of more widely known about the gut microbiome. And we often recommend to people to do gut testing if they've got digestive problems, if they've got hormonal problems and fertility problems. And as many of you will know, I did go on a bit of a rabbit hole exploration of my own health last year, and I did do the Zoe thing. And mainly because I spend a lot of time on Instagram and I was 100% influenced into doing it. And so Kirsty and I had a few conversations about the gut test and what it means and all of that kind of stuff. So I thought that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Kirsty, when we're talking about gut health, which is a word that we see all the time, is it just a posh word for digestion? Or is
Yeah,
there a difference?
no, I think in many ways it is, but it's like not. I suppose people often think about the gut microbiome when they're thinking about gut health, but it is loads more than that. So it starts from when we put food in our mouth, when those enzymes start working in our saliva to start digesting our food, and it stops working essentially when we go for a poo. So
Yes.
it's all the way through. So it goes through your digestive system into your stomach. You've got your small intestine, your large intestine. intestine. It goes all the way through, but it's also your liver, your gallbladder, and your pancreas. So it is so much more than just sort of the microbes that are there. And you need all of them to be working effectively to have good gut health, essentially.
Okay. So gut health and digestion is kind of sort of yeah, I guess they're sort of similar, aren't they?
Yeah.
Digestion is maybe talking about the process and gut health is like the wider picture.
Well, it is digestion, but it's all so interlinked, isn't it? With poor digestion, then yeah, it's you're going to have a wider problem. Um, and the microbiome itself is influenced by so many different factors.
Mm.
Along
And so when we're talking about the microbiome, the gut microbiome, what are we talking about there?
the trillions of bacteria that live within us that are responsible for energy production, for our immune health, for producing neurotransmitters, for protection against pathogens and opportunistic bacteria, much like in the vaginal microbiome, which I know you've spoken about a lot. You want your good bacteria to be able to flourish, and you want them to be able to protect from the more opportunistic bacteria thriving. We don't want that because then that can lead to problems with our digestion. And also, it's about the absorption of our nutrients and the breaking down of the food that we consume. Um, yeah.
And when I've just lost my train of thought. Hang on. Oh, I had a really good question then and it's gone. Oh yeah, I know. I'm back. Cut that bit out. And am I right in saying that unlike the vagina, so when we talk about the vaginal microbiome, we're talking about, we always say that you want less is more, like less is healthy. So you don't want many microbes in there. You want it to be kind of not many microbes, but in the gut microbiome, you want a large number of different microbes in there. Is that right?
Yeah,
Uh,
you want you want like a variety of each. You don't necessarily want to see less. Like you want more, you want abundance, you want the good bacteria to thrive and to take over and offer protection and the support that you need.
Okay, yes. And so what would you say, because it's always an interesting question, isn't it? Because a bit like periods, a lot of the time people don't like to talk about it. So because you don't talk about it, you don't really have anything to compare it to. So there's always this idea that what is normal, it's we don't really know. We don't have a benchmark. And I always feel like digestion is like that. And obviously you and me, we both sit with people and ask them on a daily basis about their digestion. And a lot of time, lots of people say it's fine. And then you sort of dig into that a little bit. And actually what you find out is that someone might say, oh, I only open my bowels every 2 days. And in their world, because it's not something they've had a chat about, that's completely normal. That's always the way they've done it. But so what actually is normal? What should your digestion be like?
Well, I think, yeah, like you say, I see a lot of people who have got used to their sort of not so great digestive systems being normal, and so assume it's normal. But actually, you want to be going for opening your bowels every day at least once. You want it to be not difficult to pass. You don't want undigested food present. You don't want a sort of oily, mucusy type consistency. You don't want to be suffering from bloating and discomfort. I think if you don't want excessive wind or gas. And actually, I think if you've got good digestion, that you've got sort of quite good concentration, and you don't have brain fog. Like, I think those are two symptoms as well that are associated with poor gut health
Oh,
that often get overlooked.
so what, brain fog being linked to poor digestion?
Yeah, yeah. There's
Wow,
like
I didn't know that.
I think most. So there are so many symptoms. I mean, of course, it could be something else as well,
Yeah.
and then other underlying factors. But mental sort of, yeah, I do think there are a lot of factors related to your gut health that are very widespread within the body and could be having an impact on different functions.
And am I right in saying that your poo should float?
I don't actually know. Is that a thing? I
We
don't,
can edit that.
I don't know that, Hannah. Do you know, my food tech teacher told me that once, but I don't know if it's true. Do you know if it's true?
Mine does, so I just assumed that that was normal. Um,
Oh, but it can. Stool is denser than water and usually sinks. It can float if it contains too much fibre, fat, or gas. According to
okay.
Google.
Um, okay, let's
Yeah.
cut that bit out. I'm just thinking about how to intersect back in. Um,
Bad digestion.
oh yeah. So to assess your digestion, Kirsty, do you think it's a good idea to have a good look down the loo and see what your poo actually looks like?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And that's like we've talked about, or you've definitely talked about before, the same with period blood, isn't it? You want to know what
Yeah.
it looks like. And so I definitely think you should know what your poo looks like. You really don't want to be looking at a sort of, it needs to be firm and soft and not difficult to pass. So likewise, you don't want it to be hard and difficult to pass with undigested food and mucus, and all of those are signs that there's some sort of dysregulation going on, or some sort of dysbiosis that needs to be addressing.
So why is there this kind of link between digestion and kind of hormones and fertility? Like, what's the kind of pathway for that?
Well, I think really, from quite a simple level, if you're not digesting your food properly and you're not absorbing those nutrients, you don't have the correct building blocks to start with. And I think that's really key. Like, you're not absorbing the food that you put in, and I see people, and I'm sure you do too, spending hundreds of pounds on supplements. And if
Mm.
you've got poor digestion, you might as well be throwing the money down the drain, as far as I'm concerned.
Or the toilet?
Or the toilet. I did. Can't believe I missed that.
So I'm always here, Kirsty. I've always got your back.
Yeah, so I think I think that is really important, is that you need to have optimize your digestion to optimize your nutrient absorption. You need those building blocks to make those hormones, but also your gut health's involved in other mechanisms like your blood sugar regulation and your estrogen detoxification, and it's linked really closely with autoimmune conditions, which we see more and more across the board.
Mm.
I think I see most of my clients probably have some kind of autoimmune issues, and that's so often linked to gut health as well.
Are there any other symptoms that you would sort of, someone might talk about in clinic that you would link to digestion as well that maybe aren't so obvious?
Yeah, so I think, like we mentioned before about the brain fog and the poor concentration, but if you become like randomly sensitive to certain foods and you can't pinpoint it to one specific food, I get so many people going, I just can't, I get bloating and I don't know why. And I think that's definitely, I would say, an indicator of some kind of dysbiosis. Anxiety and depression really, really linked with our gut health. Um, Potentially bad breath, our skin becoming inflamed and itchy and sore out of nowhere, that can be linked to gut health. And yeah, the autoimmune conditions that we were discussing just a minute ago, like with
It's
um
interesting, isn't it? Because in Chinese medicine, everything starts with the stomach.
yeah,
And everything is linked to stomach health. Well, in Chinese medicine, they call it stomach and spleen. And so often, I think I'm right. I mean, the acupuncturists who listen to this might tell me I'm wrong, but I think I can remember when I was in my studies that if the stomach and the spleen, so basically from a Chinese medicine point of view, you're talking about digestion, if that is good, then we can assume that all health is going to be okay. Like it's like the foundation, the starting point, and it's so indicative of all the other systems of the body. And in fact, it's often in sort of Chinese symbols, it's often the one right at the heart of everything. And I
yeah,
think it's like a really straightforward, simple thing, isn't it? That we've completely lost
yeah,
in the world in so many ways. We've so deviated from what good food and good digestion is that I do think definitely contributes to so many of the problems that we experience in the modern day and age.
yeah, definitely. I think that's very much the case. There are also, our internal environment is reflected with what's going on our outside as well. And we live in a very stressful time with lots of crap, lots of plastics, lots of foods that aren't real foods, lots of ultra processed foods and all that kind of stuff. And I think our gut microbiome probably probably hasn't adapted to be able to cope with such huge changes in our
Mm.
outside environment as well.
And it's really hard, isn't it? In fact, I was working with somebody yesterday and we were talking about this fact that, this idea of losing weight and eating well, it's like we all know it, don't we? Like we all know what we've got to do. But and we feel bad, don't we, when we can't do it? Like we feel sort of shame and like guilt and all those kind of things. But I always say to people, there are multi-million-dollar industries or pound industries whose job is to make us eat shit, like literally, like not literally, but like the crap. There's the advertising, the marketing. People sit around there like, okay, how are we going to push this product onto
Yeah,
people? They make it cheap, they make it accessible, they put billboards everywhere. And as a human being, it's really hard to eat well, isn't it? You just got to go and fill up your car with petrol. And you
yeah,
think, oh, okay, I want to buy a snack. And you walk into a garage and you're like, there is
so
literally nothing in here that is good for me. It is wall to wall full of crap. And so it's really hard, isn't it, to eat well all the time in the world that we live in?
definitely. Also, there's an argument to be said that I'm not sure everyone wants us to be well, because then, like you say, people stop making money from us, and
Yeah.
that's probably a different conversation altogether. But people don't actually want us to be well, so there is a lot of money going into keeping us all sick, I think.
Yeah. And
So
it's funny, isn't it? Because haven't the government like just sort of backed down on the healthy eating program? That they sort of backed down on, what they were going to deliver on that, and all the stuff around protecting young people and all that kind of stuff. I just think this is really not helping because there's always that argument of like, oh well, we're a namby state versus like the individual, but as individuals, it's hard to make good choices in a modern world. So we
you've got to
need
drown
somebody
out
to
a lot.
help us.
Yeah, you do. You've got to drown out a lot of noise to be able to
Yeah.
get. But essentially we need to go back to how we were eating before, where we eat seasonally. We eat seasonally. We're eating proper food, just ingredients only. No, we don't eat all the crap that goes into it. No processed foods, and we'd all start feeling a lot better. That's hard, especially when we're living in a world where it is so fast paced and everyone's busy and everyone's rushing around and
Yeah.
want convenience.
Yeah, and it was a thing, wasn't it? I remember like microwave meals. when I was younger, and it was like, this is the future, you know, it was like, it was seen as such a good thing, wasn't it? Well, that's how it came across to me when I was younger. I was like, this is it. You just, you know, prick a bit of plastic,
Yeah,
stick it in the microwave, you know, jobs are good. And everyone was like, this is amazing. And now we're like, actually, no,
yeah.
that's actually not very good.
Not very good. It's processed food heated in plastic. It's
Yeah.
literally the worst thing you could have done.
I grew up on that. It's a wonder I'm still here.
Because you've managed to save yourself, turn it around. I have to say though, I think it's more of it's like an education issue as well. Like I've had
Yeah.
young clients come to me with they haven't had periods for years. They don't know how to cook. They don't know that all they've done is they've heated things up their entire life. They've never had to pull together proper meals from scratch using fresh food. They've just got no idea. And that stuff there, I think, should be taught in schools because that would actually be quite useful and beneficial for our health. Because,
It
like,
really would, wouldn't it?
yeah,
Also the maths. I mean, okay, maths might be all right, but, you know, like, it's
algebra,
such
for sure. I've never used
yeah,
bloody
I mean,
algebra.
that's what we've got calculators on our iPhones for. Like, surely learning about the basics of how to feed yourself well is a
Yeah,
much better life lesson than
yeah,
long
absolutely.
division.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I mean, I'm an acupuncturist, not an accountant, so yeah.
You need
So when somebody comes to your clinic, at what point, like what signs and symptoms would somebody come into your clinic with that makes you think this person has got digestive issues, they've got gut health issues, we need to do further investigations? Like what's the kind of process that you go through?
So we're as much like you do when we're going through our detailed questionnaire, we ask all the questions, same questions as you. I would imagine, like how often you're going for a poo. Do you suffer any discomfort? Are you do you find that you're sensitive to food? All of those sorts of questions. How often you're going for a poo? What colour is it? Is it hard to pass? You know, are you in pain after you've eaten? You know, there's a huge array of questions. But also, I would look at if there were autoimmunity issues. I think I would often run a stool test for that. Um, what else would I look at? Now my mind's gone completely blank now. Endometriosis, I quite often would think to run a stool test for that as well, because that's often very linked with gut health as well. And you know, you can make some quite good improvements to their overall health with some dietary changes that way.
And do you always need to do a gut test or can you treat on symptoms alone? Like what's the benefit of testing? What do you get from testing?
Testing is really useful. I do think you can do a lot with symptoms, and I think you
Mm,
can do a lot of work before getting to the testing stage. Like lab tests and the functional tests are really, really useful if you're sort of not getting where you need to go through dietary and supplemental changes alone. Like I don't automatically just rush to a stool test because there are some changes. And also, I mean, let's be honest, they're not cheap. And when you're going
mm.
for that kind of fertility treatment, they are expensive and they're another thing to have to think about. And yeah, but you have to, I think what's boring with digestion and sorting out your digestive health is that there are some really basic steps that people don't think are very exciting, so they're not that fussed about doing, like eating really, really slowly and
Mm.
not eating in a stressful environment. I don't know. I am terrible for sitting and scrolling on Instagram when I'm eating my lunch, when I'm working during the day, and I haven't even registered that I've eaten by the time I've finished. And
Yeah.
that's something that I know that I've got to work on. But that you're taking in so much air, you're not chewing properly, and then you're going to end up not digesting your food properly right from the very start. Like you have to start at the top where the food goes in before, yeah, before you get,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's not very exciting. People would rather just take something. But you didn't really have to start from the top and work down.
I hear that. I mean, I literally inhale my food, like, in one.
Yes, I've eaten with you many
Yeah.
times.
It's and I can't help it, I forget. And then I always I always look round and I think, "Oh, everyone else has just sort of started and, my plate is empty."
It's so true though, but that's where your digestive starts. Like you need to chew your food, and some food you need to really chew, like nuts and seeds and things. You really need to give them a proper chew before you eat them to give them your digestive juices chance to get going and to do their thing.
Yeah. And so, so if you do a gut test, what kind of things do you find? Like, what's the information that you find out that you can't find out just by looking at symptoms?
So what I like to do tests that look at you as a host, or the person, the client as a host, as well as their microbiome, if you like, because that can tell us an awful lot about their immune function, their inflammatory markers, any kind of inflammation, their digestive capacity. It can tell us about how their bile acids are doing. There's lots of things to think about as well. Then we can look at the good bacteria, much like we do. We can see what's missing. We can see where there might be areas we need to work on. But we can also then look at the more opportunistic bacteria. We can also look at whether there's parasites present, and there are some parasites that we can live with completely problem free. But in abundance, they might be causing us more issues. But that's why it's always important to look at these tests in relation to symptoms and
Mm.
not look at these tests standalone. Because if you look at these tests and go, oh my goodness, they've got a parasite, and treat them for that parasite, but that parasite's not doing them any harm whatsoever, and it's just a normal part of our microbiome, then
Mm.
essentially not really, you're just wasting money and time, and you can just leave things alone. It's really important to look at everything along with symptoms.
And there are a lot of gut tests out there now. It seems like there's been a bit like the vaginal microbiome testing. There seems like, and maybe it's just me and my Instagram feed, but it seems like there's lots of different ways of doing it, lots and lots in different details. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I did the Zoe one, and that is, people have said that's actually quite a basic test. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on what would you recommend for people to do? Because, like me here, who got completely influenced. I tell you why, I tell you why I did it, because I saw Davina in a pair of dungarees with a Zoe thing on, and that was it. I was like, yep, sign me up. I'm there. So what would you recommend for, weak-minded people like me who are easily influenced?
I think also the thing with the tests that you can buy on the market, which are great, and I've got one here that I've been sent to try that I'm going to give a go soon. But I think you need to go in it trying to with a I don't know. I don't know really how that. Like, there are so. What do you need to do it essentially? Like, did you
Yeah.
need Zoe test, the Zoe stool test? I don't know what that's what the outcome is. And yes, you want an understanding of it, which I get, but you need to look at it. There's so much more to it than just the bacteria that are living within you. There are also how you as the host are interacting with those bacteria as well, and that I think needs to be taken into consideration. That's why I would always choose a test that looks at both those things.
Yes. So I guess what you're saying is like you've got a clear idea of why you're doing it and what information you want to get out of it.
Yeah, and I think like with any tests, you also then need to know what to do with that information once you've got it, and that's why it's, I think, important to work with someone who is going to do a really detailed case review with you and go through everything. Because, like
Yeah.
we said, digestion is not your poor digestion is not just you getting bloating. It is also the brain fog, the autoimmune conditions, there's so many more factors to it that by doing a sort of fairly basic stool test, I'm not sure you're getting the full picture. I might be wrong, and I haven't done loads of other stool tests. I tend to stick to the same few ones that I do, so I'm
Mm.
happy to be corrected, but I just feel like you need more information to be able to
And
build a big picture.
when you get the results from somebody's gut test, what happens next? Like what do you say to people?
So we go through. So I tend to go through them. We see what's going on with them as a host. We see how their digestive capacity is working. We're looking for any inflammation. We're looking to see if they've got any blood in their stool that might not be presenting itself any other way. We are then looking at what bacteria we're missing and why they're missing. Again, you always need to ask the questions why as well. Like, why are we
Mm.
missing? What are we not getting from our diet that is meaning that we're missing this? Have they had prolonged antibiotic use that could have caused all these bacteria to be decimated? Because antibiotics are great, but they're not particularly good for us. And yeah, I think we would then look at what is needed to make the situation better. And that's not always supplements. Like, it's quite often it's nutrition and food and making sure we're putting the good stuff in.
Mm. And it was interesting, wasn't it? Because there was an article recently, I don't know where it was, but it was about the number of people who are trying to conceive who are nutrient deficient. Did
Yes.
you see that
Yeah, I
article?
saw that in The Guardian, I think it
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
And do you think that is because of this notion that, is it because of the food that people are eating, their diet, or is it a combination of that plus poor digestion?
I think it's probably both, if I'm
Yeah.
perfect. I think, like we were saying earlier, with poor digestion, we become very used to it, and it becomes our normal. Sorry,
Yes.
we become very used to it, and so we think it's normal. But yeah, the fact that we're probably not eating food that's particularly nutrient dense anymore, because that has changed over the years, and like, because our soil isn't as good as it used to be, but also our food is coming from all over the world, and so is sitting in the dark for a very long time before it arrives to us, which I think is affecting the nutrient status of food. And then we've got poor digestion on top of that, and
Mm.
yeah, I think it's sort of a world of issues, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard to, it makes you kind of want to go and, like, I don't know, live on the land and like grow your veg. I mean,
Well,
I mean,
in an ideal
that's the most
world,
ridiculous thing I've ever said, because I mean, I'm so far from that place.
but I do think that there is an element of that is what we do need to do. It's just,
Yeah.
and that's not practical. But eating seasonally and trying to eat food that's not travelled for miles and miles is definitely a step in the right direction. To
Yeah.
the closest thing you can get to living on the land and growing your
Yeah.
own veg. You don't have the space to do that.
Living in Sainsbury's Local. Sainsbury's Local just is open round the corner. I'm literally in there every day.
I've heard that it's opened. I have been
Very
informed
excited.
by a mutual client.
So, what about this idea of probiotics? Because again, there's this whole thing about probiotics, prebiotics, kombucha, kimchi, all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Where are you on that? And also, I'm asking you a lot of questions here. Lots of people often ask me, what is the deal with Yakult?
Yakult.
Is it
It's
a good thing or not?
a sugary drink. I don't think people should start their day with an Actimel or a Yakult or the Zoe gut shot, because essentially they've all got sugar in, and I don't think that's a good way to start your day. I think you'd be much better going by, and this is another controversial topic. Is it kefir or kefir?
Kefir.
I
Kefir.
call
Not Kefir. Kefir
I
Sutherland.
kefir.
Kefir Sutherland.
I called it kefir on a podcast I was listening to the other day. Anyway,
Well, I don't know what podcast you were listening to, Kirsty, but they were wrong.
it was a very sciencey one, actually. Anyway, so yeah, I think probiotics are great, and I do think they have their place. I don't think we should be popping them willy nilly all the time without reason. I think we can do an awful lot without having to take them. I think when I use them in a clinical setting, I've usually either would recommend them based on symptoms, and knowing that that particular strain has been researched in that area to help with that particular symptom or that particular set of symptoms. With antibiotics, if someone was taking antibiotics, I would probably recommend a probiotic as well to support that. Yeah, and would always make sure that there was research to back up why I'm
Yeah.
using it, essentially.
Because the other thing is that they're really expensive, aren't they? Some of them are really, you can spend a lot of money on a probiotic in a nice jar.
You can, in a lovely jar, in a lovely glass.
Again.
I do think they are really useful, and I think they definitely have a role. But
Mm,
essentially, I might even, prebiotics are just as important, because they feed your good bacteria. So prebiotic is essentially the food for your good bacteria. So
right.
prebiotic is the food that your good bacteria needs. So
Okay.
you can be putting in probiotics, but if you're not putting any prebiotics in, you're not, it's not going to be as effective as it would be. So prebiotic foods are, so one supplement that I do often recommend is a prebiotic supplement that is, essentially a fiber that your body can use to feed. But and then you can also have it, it's also food based as well, and lots of
Mm,
food commonly eat are prebiotics, but it's good to You're going to ask me what they are now, aren't you?
I am going to ask you what they are. Yeah. What kind of what is considered a prebiotic?
So prebiotics are things like leeks and onions, and I can't remember the rest now. Maybe Jerusalem artichokes, and garlic, leeks, onions, all the foods that you would commonly eat
Yeah.
as well, which are really good. Chicory, which people don't always eat. Dandelion greens, a bit harder to get. Garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, bananas, um,
Mm.
barley, oats, apples. So like there's good amounts of prebiotic foods in your everyday foods, but I do think
Yeah.
that that's quite a good supplement to help with your digestion.
Okay. And in terms of like your top tips, I love a
I do-
top tip. What would you say from, because I mean, what's his face from the Zoe app?
Oh, Phil, not Phil Spector.
Tim, not Phil, Tim.
Yes.
Tim, he's always talking about the number of different fruit and veg, you need to eat on a daily basis.
Is it
And
30?
that is like a full-time job, isn't it?
It is a full-time job, but it's not as hard. I mean, I'm not going to say that I do it always,
Yeah,
but I think it's not like it. That includes herbs, dried herbs, like
yeah,
all of your fruit and all of your veg. I think it is a big thing, and I think maybe you could aim for that over a week. Maybe,
yeah.
perhaps that's more achievable. But I do think it's quite a wide variety of plant foods that make up the 30. So it is achievable, but you do have to put a bit of thought into it.
And so so eat a wide variety of fruit and veg. What are your other top tips for a good digestion?
Slow down, like properly slow down, like be really mindful of your eating. I think that's probably one of the most important things that people don't do is that chew your food properly, slow down, try not to eat in a stressful environment. Like stress is another factor that affects our digestive system massively, which we can't avoid, as we know. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this podcast. But
Yeah,
it's trying to eat in a calm environment, like when you're not on the go, that is really, really important.
yeah,
Um, chew your food properly, really do. So
yeah,
walk down like you do. Maybe bitter foods as well before your meal, like rocket and endive and all of those sort of dandelion. Probably a bit harder to get, but the bitter foods really help stimulate your digestive juices and get that whole process and like increase your stomach acid and give you those supportive
mm,
bits and pieces that you need to start your digestive uh,
yeah. And
process.
what about this idea of breakfast? So breakfast is always, there's a lot to talk about. In fact, we are going to do a whole episode on breakfast. But what are your this idea of the first thing that you put in your stomach in the morning is being important.
Yeah.
What would you say? What would your go-to be?
I always think eggs are just the best thing to have for
Yeah.
breakfast. Eggs, some kind of fat. Really, we need that. It's really important. Um, Maybe I quite often have spinach with my breakfast as well. That's quite a good option because it's always good to. But breakfast is a good way. Breakfast is actually a meal that gets overlooked when people are trying to eat loads of plant food. Like you can have there's loads of things that you can have with your breakfast to get off to a good start with trying to eat loads of fruit and veg in the day,
Yeah.
mushrooms and all, garlic and leeks, all sorts of things, leftover dinner from the night before, anything. But I think breakfast is really important. I'm a big fan of a breakfast.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't be a nutritional therapist if you weren't, would you? Because you
Would I?
can't you can't be a nutritional therapist and not love breakfast.
God, that goes against everything we believe in. Um, I think that's the other thing is that what we need is diversity. Like your gut microbiome does not want you to eat the same food day in, day out, week in, week out. It wants diversity. It needs the different colours, the polyphenols, all the phytonutrients. It needs all of that good stuff to feed it and to make it strong and robust and to protect. And then that will protect you from um, pathogens and all sorts of nasties that are going in, and help you absorb your foods and get those nutrients to where they need to go, because that's what you need for fertility essentially is you need all those important cofactors for cell development and egg health and sperm development and even for everything. So
Yeah.
we do get them into the right place. Digestion is really, I think digestion is one of the most important things that we should be focusing on with fertility. It's so far reaching across our whole bodies.
I agree, and I also think, like we said at the beginning, that it's so important, and yet it's so compromised because of the world that we live in.
Yeah,
It's no shame in here or calling anyone out about anything. This is just like we're fighting
yeah.
massive. Yeah, we are, and it's hard, isn't it?
I think you've only got to look at the Zoe project to see what good advertising and
Yeah,
money behind and celebrity endorsement can do for something. I mean, like we
yeah,
were routinely all checking our blood sugar and running stool tests, and like up until that came along, and that's what happens with the food industry and the ultra processed food industry is it has all that money behind it that can just
yeah,
push
yeah,
things. I do think one thing on the Zoe, we haven't really talked about it hugely. I don't know. I don't use it, so I don't know as much about it as other people do. But I think there's a real possibility that it can cause health anxiety within people. And when you're going through fertility issues
yes,
as it is, and
yeah.
everything is really hard and really stressful and so out of your control, having to be worried about your like then doing a stool test and worrying about that, and then doing blood sugar monitoring and worrying about that is perhaps something we don't need.
It's hard, isn't it? It's complicated, isn't it? Because, doing it myself, it did definitely trigger, because my blood sugar was going low at certain points.
Mm.
And I was like, I was like, I don't need to go. Why? It definitely wasn't always a positive experience. But I guess also to say, in terms of when we're talking about big business, I guess it is somebody doing something in a way that's promoting
Yeah,
the good stuff, isn't it? So it's kind of, I don't want to slate it because that it's not a voice that we're hearing a lot.
it's definitely raising awareness and it's definitely getting in front of us, which is definitely a good thing. I'm not, and
Yeah,
also blood sugar the and the glucose monitoring in some instances with people who have have conditions maybe such as PCOS where they're really struggling with their blood sugar levels could potentially be of use. But I
yeah,
think you have to be really mindful of whether that person has also had an eating disorder in the past
yeah,
or had any kind of food issues or issues around any kind of disordered eating, because then you shouldn't be using a blood sugar go to take you straight back to where you were. So I do think it's again very much about working with the individual.
Well,
To
thank you very much, Kirsty. We could carry on and on talking about this topic because it's so interesting and it's so important. And I think, if there's any one thing that we highlight from this is to really think about your, I'm not talking about you, Kirsty, but people who are listening to this, is to really check in with your digestion, because obviously we talk a lot, don't we, about checking in with your cycle, tracking your cycle, looking at your period, all of these kind of things, and using that as clues to understand your fertility. And I guess it's literally just come to me this moment, and I feel quite pleased with what's just happened, is that your digestion, it's exactly the same, isn't it? It's giving us clues about
yeah,
our underlying health and areas where we can make improvements to really support our health and our fertility. So I think it's a really important topic that we will come back and talk about again.
I was going to say is an awful lot more that we could say. It could
Yeah,
almost be another part because it's there is a lot more about the sort of more sciencey stuff that we could go into. I don't. This isn't going to be science,
yeah,
but there is definitely more you could do to help with the understanding of what the functions actually are within the body.
yeah. Well, we shall do that, Kirsty.
Okay,
Anon, as they say.
and on.
Anon. So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it, and it's lovely to see you.
Thank you for
And
having.
I will put all your details on the show notes. So if anyone wants to find out more about working with you, they can do. We've also got a lot of stuff on nutrition and digestion and supporting that in our Facebook community. There's loads of webinars in there that Kirsty has done. We've got a Q&A coming up.
We have.
So in February with Kirsty. So if you're interested in that, then I'll put the details on there. And thank you very much, Kirsty.